I'll never forget the exact words that changed everything. One day the said be mine. I already picked the paint. The grill smoke curled into the warm March air like nothing was wrong. Birds chattered in the magnolia branches overhead, and somewhere down the street a neighbor's laugh echoed. But those 10 words from Emily sliced through the easy spring evening like a cable pulled too tight. I froze, tongs in hand, watching the stakes hiss over the coals. She stood under the tree Susan planted, wineglass tilted toward her friend, talking about my house like she was picking out curtains for a future she already owned. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from. Charlottesville, Virginia, March 11th, 2018. A Sunday that smelled like fresh grass and warm cedar. The kind of spring day that makes you believe life still has surprises left. We were celebrating Mark's promotion, my son. He and Emily had driven down from D.C. for the weekend. They'd been married 4 years. She was 32, sharp-eyed, quick, with charm when she needed it, and always dressed like brunch was a red carpet event. I used to think that was just her personality. That night I saw something colder underneath. Susan planted that magnolia tree in 2009, a year after we built this house. She'd said, "When it blooms, it'll mean we made it." She was right. This house was our anchor. Cedar brick, wraparound porch, a kitchen where family and Navy buddies traded stories late into the night. We paid it off in December 2015. I still keep the payoff letter in a plastic sleeve. Susan's handwriting scrawled at the bottom. We did it. Love S. Hearing Emily's voice under that tree felt like someone stepping on a grave. She laughed with her friend, a bright, careless sound. Seriously, Jenna, we still move the fence line, paint the shutters white, maybe add a pool. It's SEP's just a matter of time. A matter of time. I didn't say anything. I flipped the steak, forced a smile when Mark called for a beer, and filed every word away. Years in the Navy taught me that storms whisper before they roar. Later that night, when the house had gone still, I stepped onto the porch. Magnolia petals glowed ghost pale under the porch light. The air held that soft Virginia chill that settles in after sunset. I leaned on the rail, thumb tracing the smooth grain, and asked myself, was that just a careless remark, or a blueprint? Emily's ambition had always been there, tucked behind the polished smile. She came from a family that measured success in square footage and the gloss of magazine pages. She didn't just want nice things. She expected them. And this house, this was Susan's dream. Losing it would be like losing her all over again. The first real warning came the next morning. We were in the kitchen, coffee brewing, sunlight slanting through the bay windows. Emily flipped through a Charlottesville luxury property magazine she'd brought with her. Not Better Homes and Gardens, mind you. High-gloss, four-bedroom estates. Realtor headshots everywhere. This neighborhood sits market is crazy, she said casually. Half to Mark, half to me. 2.1 for the place on Hickory, and it sets smaller than this. I mean, if we played our cards right. She stopped when she saw me watching. Her smile didn't falter, it sharpened. Just keeping an eye on things. I laughed lightly, but my gut had already nodded. After breakfast, they packed up the car and headed back to D.C. I stood in the driveway watching them disappear down the street, the magnolia tree casting dappled shadows on the hood. Susan used to wave from that very spot when I left for deployments. Now I was waving at a son who didn't realize a fuse had been lit. That night, I opened the fireproof safe in my study. Inside were the bones of everything Susan and I had built: the 2008 deed, the December 18th, 2015 mortgage payoff letter, $699,842 final payment, appraisal reports, trust papers, each in labeled folders chronologically stacked, just the way an engineer does it. This wasn't just a house, it was a ledger of promises. I pulled out the payoff letter. Susan's looping handwriting at the bottom hit me like a wave. We did it. She died in 2017, just 2 years later, and this house became my tether to her. After the funeral under the magnolia tree, I whispered a promise into the soil. I'd protect it, keep it in the family, guard its roots. So when Emily stood under that same tree and spoke like a future heiress, something in me shifted, quietly, permanently. A week later, I met Tom Reddick for lunch. Route 250. The old diner with cracked vinyl booths and coffee that could strip paint. Tom and I served together in '89, me in engineering, him in JAG. He'd stayed in Charlottesville after the Navy, set up a small law office, and had the kind of mind that spotted cracks before anyone else noticed the wall. Over BLTs and bottomless coffee, I told him what Emily said. He didn't laugh, he leaned back, eyes narrowing just a fraction. "You think she sips serious?" he asked. "I don't know," I admitted, "but Susan Sips gone, and if anything happens to me, I don't Sips want this place tied up in a mess." Tom nodded slowly. "Then make sure your paperwork setters tighter than a watertight hatch. The deed setters in your name only?" "Yeah. Built in T08, paid off in T15. No liens." "Good. Keep it that way." And Orion, he leaned forward, people reveal their plays in offhand remarks. Sometimes they scepter just showing off. Sometimes they scepter laying groundwork. I drove home with his words bouncing around my head. On paper I was secure, but the Navy had taught me. Vulnerabilities don't always live in the hull. They live in the crew. Spring drifted into summer. I tried to shake it off, but every time Emily visited, she left breadcrumbs. Comments about kitchen layouts, property lines, how modern buyers love open floor plans. Always said lightly, always with that same half smile. She wasn't set dreaming out loud. She was measuring, and I started listening. I used to think betrayal announced itself with shouting, slammed doors, and broken plates. Turns out sometimes it moves in quietly, like a shadow through an unlocked door. By late 2019, Emily's comments had become less casual and more territorial. At first it was little things. She'd rearranged Susan's china cabinet for better flow, or open doors in the house that weren't hers to open. But in November she crossed an invisible line. November 22nd, 2019, Friday night. The air carried that brittle Virginia cold that settles right after the leaves give up and fall. Mark and Emily arrived after work, dragging suitcases into the hallway. I was making chili in the kitchen when I overheard her say it. "Mark, if we're going to move into the guest wing, we should at least repaint. This beige is depressing." I paused, spoon mid-stir. Mark chuckled, not catching the undertone. It sets Dad sets house." She lowered her voice. "But the house carries sound like a ship sips corridor." "Yeah, for now. But if we split, this counts as marital residence. He sips old, Mark. He one sips fight it." The words landed like cold steel. "Not if we move in. If we split. Not his house. Marital residence." I stayed silent, heart thudding against my ribs. Years at sea had trained me to listen through walls. This was no drunken joke. This was legal positioning whispered between suitcases and hallway echoes. I didn't just confront her. Not then. You never charge head-on into fog. You chart its shape first. The following morning, after they left for brunch, I went upstairs to the guest wing. She'd already moved a few boxes in, nicely labeled with neat handwriting. Kitchen, winter clothes, misc. It wasn't a casual overnight stay. It was a beachhead. In the Navy, we called this soft occupation. When someone doesn't storm the ship, they just quietly start acting like they already own it. And if you let it go unchecked, one day you wake up and realize the helm isn't yours anymore. I went back to my study, opened the file cabinet, and pulled out the folder labeled Howe's Originals. Inside were the deed, mortgage records, and Susan Sepp's trust notes. I added a clean sheet of paper and wrote at the top, "Emily, Statements, Actions." The first entry. November 22nd, 2019. If we split, this counts as marital residence. He Sepp's old. He one Sepp fight it. Under it, I jotted the time and place. Then I slid the folder back into the fire safe. It wasn't set paranoia anymore. It was documentation. A week later, I found proof that erased any lingering doubt. It was a Tuesday night. I was cleaning up the kitchen when I noticed a sheet of paper folded and tucked halfway behind the microwave. Emily had printed a text conversation, probably for her lawyer, and left it there by accident. My name wasn't such mention, but one phrase jumped off the page. Marital home == leverage. No context, no explanation, Just those 3 words in a bubble, time-stamped November 27th, 9:42 p.m. I remember the way the paper felt between my fingers, thin, slightly warm from the microwave. I slipped it into a manila envelope and labeled it with the date. Then I placed it in the folder. Evidence, not emotion. That was the night I realized Emily wasn't just ambitious. She was strategic. She understood that property law could be a weapon, and she was drawing the first lines of battle. December rolled in with frost on the magnolia branches. Mark started spending more weekends here with Emily, saying it was to save on rent while they figured out next steps. But it was clear who was driving the decision. She started hosting little wine nights in my kitchen, inviting friends from Charlottesville, showing off corners of the house like a realtor giving a tour. The natural light here is amazing, she'd purr, running her fingers over the marble counter Susan had picked out herself. I'd stand by the hallway arch, watching quietly. She never acknowledged that it was my house. It was always ours when she spoke to guests, like my presence had already been folded into the wallpaper. Mark, for his part, didn't push back. He'd always been conflict averse. Sweet kid growing up, brilliant with numbers, but when it came to Emily, he deferred like a man afraid to disturb a sleeping lioness. I could see it in the way he glanced at her for approval during conversations. I told myself he'd snap out of it. But that night on the staircase replayed in my head like a loop transmission. If we split, this counts as marital residence. He's old, he won't fight it. She wasn't Senate just moving in. She was maneuvering. The moment that sealed my quiet vigilance came on Christmas Eve 2019. I said kept Susan Sepp's china, arranged exactly the way she loved. Patterned plates on the left, teacups in the glass display. Her handwritten note taped inside the cabinet door. Don't set you dare chip these, Orion. Emily opened the cabinet, smiled, and began rearranging. She moved the plates to a lower shelf, swapped the teacups for wine glasses, and tucked Susan's note into a drawer without a word. I didn't stop her. I watched. Because sometimes you need people to show you who they really are. That night, after they went to bed, I took Susan's note from the drawer, smoothed out the creases, and slipped it into the folder. I underlined the date at the top of a fresh page, December 24th, 2019. I wasn't grieving anymore. I was building a record. By New Year's, the shape of Emily's plan was becoming clear. She wasn't going to wait for inheritance. She was trying to reframe my house as their marital residence, inch by inch, month by month. And if she ever decided to detonate that claim in court, I needed to be ready long before the first filing hit the clerk's desk. Every word she said from then on, every move she made inside these walls, I watched like a hawk. She thought she was laying leverage in the shadows. She didn't set no, I set it already turned the lights on. May 17th, 2020. A Sunday morning that started ordinary dew still clinging to the magnolia leaves, sunlight slanting through the porch rails, and ended with the unmistakable click of a drill echoing through the attic stairwell. That sound wasn't just metal against wood, it was a boundary being redrawn. The pandemic had emptied the streets. Charlottesville felt suspended between fear and quiet, like the whole town was holding its breath. Emily and Mark had decided to ride things out at my house. They called it temporary. I knew better. By then I'd learned that nothing Emily did inside these walls was temporary. It started with a request over breakfast. She came down in her silk robe, coffee mug in hand, like she already owned the place. Orion, she said, using my name like a boardroom formality, we really should do a family inventory. There sits a lot of unused space up in the attic. I sips like access to check what sets up there. I looked up from my eggs. The attic sits not for storage. Most of that stuff sits personal. Susan sets things. She smiled, not kindly. Exactly. Family things. We should know what sips there. Mark sat between us, eyes flicking nervously, the way he always did when conflict brewed. Dad, maybe it sits not a bad idea, he offered softly. Just to organize. I'd spent decades working with schematics. I knew when someone was trying to redraw a map, the attic wasn't just storage, it was Susan's archive, her journals, her paintings, boxes of Navy mementos she'd carefully labeled. That space was sacred, and Emily knew it. By noon, made my decision. I drove into town, stopped at Miller's Hardware, and bought new lock cylinders for the attic and garage doors. Total $42.16. The receipt is still folded in the back of my study ledger, dated and underlined in red. At 4:30 p.m., while Emily hosted a Zoom wine night downstairs, I climbed the attic stairs with my drill flashlight and a quiet resolve. The sound of the old lock being unscrewed echoed like footsteps in an empty hangar. Clean, final. When I slid the new lock in place and felt it click, something in my chest settled. It wasn't defiance, it was preservation. I changed the garage lock next. Then, as the sun dipped low, I stood on the porch and reissued new front door keys to Mark and Emily, handed them over without ceremony. Mark accepted his with a nod. Emily's smile didn't reach her eyes. "You didn't have to do that," she said, tilting her head. "I did," I answered evenly. "It sets a good time to make sure everything was secure." She held my gaze for a second too long, then turned back toward the house. I watched her go, and for the first time she looked less like a daughter-in-law and more like an opponent who just noticed the chessboard had shifted. By June, the house had fallen into a tense rhythm. Mornings were quiet, afternoons were filled with Emily's carefully curated social media lives, wine glasses, country chic backgrounds, little details that turned my home into her aesthetic prop. She'd angle her phone to crop me out, but sometimes I'd catch my reflection in the glass door behind her, ghost-like, watching from the kitchen doorway. The neighborhood, meanwhile, had turned inward. HOA emails buzzed about mask rules and backyard gatherings. Nancy Green, my neighbor of 15 years and Susan's closest friend, stopped by during one of her walks. She stood at the base of the magnolia tree, hands tucked into her jacket. "She sits, making herself comfortable," Nancy observed, nodding toward the house. I said, "Seen this before." My cousin went through it. Daughter-in-law moves in, starts changing the wallpaper. Next thing you know, she sits, hosting book clubs like she owns the place. I smiled tightly. She sips, adapting. Nancy gave me a look that saw more than I said. "Be careful, Orion. Some vines don't set, just grow. They take over." July 2nd, 2020. I remember the exact date because the air conditioner had gone out that morning, and the house was filled with the restless heaviness of summer heat. I was taking the trash out when I saw it. A crumpled sheet of glossy paper sticking out of the recycling bin by the garage. At first I thought it was junk mail, but when I pulled it free and flattened it, my stomach went cold. It was a real estate flyer, professionally mocked up, full color, a coming soon listing for my house. Except it wasn't my house. It was Emily's fantasy version of it. The photo had been photoshopped. Shutters white, fence line extended, pool sparkling in the backyard. At the bottom, in neat font, "Luxury Family Estate. Charlottesville Sifta's hidden gem." There was no realtor contact, no phone number, just a slogan in a house that didn't exist yet. I stood alone in the kitchen holding that flyer while the refrigerator hummed in the background. Susan's handwriting was still taped inside the china cabinet. The magnolia tree's shadow swayed across the window, and suddenly the walls felt closer, like the house itself was holding its breath. I slipped the flyer into a plastic sleeve, labeled it with the date, and filed it in the House Originals folder. That night I sat on the back porch long after the house went quiet. The air smelled like cut grass and approaching rain. I thought about all the things Emily had said since that first careless remark in 2018, about leverage, about ours, about marital residence. The rekeyed locks were the first clear boundary I'd drawn, but that flyer, photoshopped, printed, discarded carelessly, told me she wasn't just dreaming out loud, she was planning. The difference between fantasy and strategy is paperwork, and Emily had started hers. By late July, Emily's frustration started to leak through the cracks. She knocked on the attic door one afternoon, found it locked, and called up the stairs. "Orion, I can get in. I need to look through those boxes." I stayed calm. "I told you that cis personal storage. I am part of this family too," she shot back. "You can just shut me out." But that's exactly what I'd done, legally and physically. And from the tightening of her voice, she knew it. Mark tried to mediate that evening at dinner. He always did. Dad, maybe you could just let her check a few boxes? It's just not worth fighting over a lock. I set my fork down and met his eyes. This house is worth fighting over, Mark. Emily said nothing. She didn't have to. The look she gave me across that table was sharp as a drawn blade. By the end of summer, the pattern was undeniable. She'd pushed, I'd pushed back. And somewhere between the attic lock and the fake flyer, we both understood this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a slow siege. She was maneuvering through shadows, and I was starting to map her every move. There's a particular kind of silence that falls right before you learn the truth about someone. It's not the peaceful kind. It's taut, like a rope stretched to breaking. April 2021 was when that silence snapped. By then, Emily had turned subtle pressure into routine. She treated my home like a stage, and every dinner, every hallway conversation carried undertones of possession. I'd grown used to her circling the subject of the house without ever touching it directly. But that month, she finally slipped, and I was ready to catch it. April 10th, 2021, Saturday. A warm afternoon with dogwoods blooming, Charlottesville in full spring. We hosted a small barbecue in the backyard for a few neighbors. Nancy Green came as she always did, bringing her famous deviled eggs. Mark was flipping burgers. Emily was holding court by the porch, glass of rosé in hand, entertaining a couple from down the street. I'd made a quiet stop earlier that day at Walgreens. Total $29.97. One small audio recorder, batteries included. I remember the way the cashier bagged it like it was any other impulse purchase. But this wasn't impulse, this was preparation. I slipped the recorder into the inside pocket of my Navy windbreaker before the guests arrived. Years of engineering taught me to trust systems more than promises. Emily's boasts were becoming bolder, and I needed proof, not just suspicions, not hearsay, proof that would hold up when things turned from whispers to filings. The party started around 4. The grill smoked, laughter carried across the yard, and music floated from the Bluetooth speaker on the porch rail. But beneath it all, I kept an ear on Emily. By sunset, with people a little looser, she started talking bigger. She leaned toward her friends, voice just loud enough to be heard over the sizzle of the grill. "I ain't sin telling you," she said, her words rounded by wine. "Judges love young moms. Worst case, I sue." He once said no would hit him. Click, recorder on. The sound was faint under the jacket fabric, but it was there. A tiny, decisive click that turned casual bragging into evidence. Nancy, standing a few feet away with her paper plate, caught my glance. Later, she'd tell me she'd heard every word. Emily kept going. "It's basically guaranteed. Marital residence, emotional hardship, optics. He's a veteran, sure, but come on. He's almost 60. He doesn't want a court fight." She laughed then, tossing her hair like she'd already won a game I didn't know we were playing. I stood by the grill, tongs in hand, heart steady. There was no outburst, no confrontation, just quiet recording, the way you take a photograph of a storm on the horizon. 2 days later, April 12th, I sat with Tom Reddick in his office. The same diner BLTs had been replaced with legal pads and black coffee. He listened to the recording twice. Once with a slight smile, second time with a slow nod. "She sits digging her own hole," Tom said, leaning back. "And you, my friend, just brought a shovel to the courthouse." I slid the Walgreens receipt across the table. "For the record," he chuckled. "You always were meticulous. This is good. Hearsay at a barbecue is gossip. A dated recording with corroborating witnesses? That's Sepp's strategy." Nancy provided her notarized statement the next day. She was steady, as always. I heard her say she sent Sue, and that the judge would favor her. I wrote it that night, dated it, and signed it. I know how this stuff works. Orion. I watch enough court shows. It was both funny and deadly serious. Emily, of course, had no idea. She kept treating my house like her campaign headquarters. She walked through rooms commenting on how the shutters will need repainting soon, or that wall could come down to open the kitchen. But now, every time she spoke, I heard the recording in my head. "Judges love young moms. Worst case, I sue. He won't know what hit him." That wasn't such speculation anymore. That was intent. April 21st, 2021. Nancy came by after dinner as twilight stretched long shadows across the lawn. She brought over a small stack of HOA flyers and a slice of lemon pound cake wrapped in foil. She sat on the porch steps looking at the magnolia tree. She sips, making her move, Nancy said quietly. I know, I answered. Then make yours. Don't let her catch you flat-footed, Orion. You set, smarter than that. I looked at the tree, its branches swaying in the soft breeze. Susan used to sit under it with Nancy, gossiping about neighbors drinking sweet tea. They'd laugh for hours. Now it stood like a silent witness to a battle Susan never got to see. Nancy reached into her jacket and pulled out a small notepad. I wrote down everything I remember from that night, just in case. I smiled. You always were thorough. She shrugged. You were Navy. I sep I'm a librarian. We both respect records. When I got back inside, I locked the recording, Nancy's statement, and the Walgreens receipt in the house. Originals folder. Then I made 2 certified copies. One for Tom's office safe, one for mine. I labeled everything clearly BBQ recording. April 10th, 2021, witness statement. N. Green, April 11th. Purchase receipt, April 10th. I'd started this folder as a quiet precaution. By now it was a weapon, and every document inside it was another inch of ground I refused to surrender. That night, lying in bed, I replayed Emily's words in my head like a radio frequency. He won't know what hit him. She thought my silence was weakness. She didn't realize it was calculation. Out on the lawn, the magnolia branches brushed against the siding in the wind. A soft, rhythmic sound, almost like fingers tapping, almost like the house itself was keeping time. The click of that recorder was still fresh in my memory, a small, sharp sound that cut through months of manipulation. For the first time, I didn't feel cornered. I felt prepared. December 2nd, 2021. The day I signed the letter that turned my quiet vigilance into a legal shield. The Veterans Trust had been on my radar for years. After Susan passed, I'd met with their representatives in Charlottesville about structuring the house under a protective trust, something that would secure it for Mark after I was gone, but keep it legally insulated from marital disputes or opportunists. Back then I hadn't acted. I thought family loyalty was enough. Emily cured me of that illusion. That winter morning was clear and sharp. The magnolia branches were bare, their black lines etched against a pale sky. I sat in Tom Reddick's office, the radiator humming in the corner, and signed the contingent transfer letter. If anything happened to me, illness, accident, death, the house would immediately transfer into the Veterans Trust. Not probate, no court battles. Ironclad. Tom slid the document back toward me, tapped the notarization block. This goes into effect immediately upon triggering events. You start not giving it away, Orion. You start putting a shield around it. I nodded. Susan Woodseth wanted that. She would have wanted you to stop playing defense, he replied. He made 2 certified copies. One went into his office safe, one into my Howo's originals binder. The originals stayed with me, tucked behind the 2015 payoff letter like armor behind a vow. 3 days later, on December 5th, I accidentally left one of those certified copies on the kitchen counter, right where Emily would see it. I didn't have to wait long. I was in the den that afternoon, repairing a loose chair leg, when I heard her footsteps stop abruptly. Paper rustled. Silence stretched. She didn't say a word about it that day, but at dinner I noticed the smile tight at the corners. Like someone whose plan had just encountered an unexpected wall, she tried to mask it with casual conversation about holiday decorations, but her eyes were sharp, calculating. Mark, oblivious, asked if we should string the Christmas lights early this year. She placed her hand over his and said sweetly, "Of course, traditions matter." But her glance at me told another story. She'd seen the trust letter, and she didn't like it. Early 2022 brought cracks she couldn't plaster over. Emily's boutique in DC had always been more style than substance, a lifestyle brand heavy on curated Instagram posts, light on actual revenue. When the pandemic hit, supply chains choked and foot traffic vanished, By February, creditors were calling the house at dinner time. I'd pick up sometimes just to hear the tone in their voices. Miss Hale owes $7,400 to Bloom Source vendors past due 93 days. Miss Hale, this is your final reminder regarding your $3,200 outstanding balance. She'd laugh it off afterward, brittle and forced. Oh, they sip just being dramatic. Everyone sips delayed right now. But I'd see the unopened envelopes stacked on the foyer table, thick and red-stamped. The image burned itself into my memory. Emily dropping another bill onto the pile like someone feeding wood to a fire she thought she could control. Mark tried to help. He dipped into savings, covered a few debts, reassured her it was temporary. But it wasn't. Her boutique folded by spring, and when the facade cracked, her hunger for my house sharpened. Because when your financial empire collapses, legacy property looks like a lifeboat. Spring bled into summer, and beneath her polished exterior, frustration simmered. She hosted fewer gatherings. Her Instagram feed turned quieter, more curated, less spontaneous. She started spending more time pacing the back porch at night. Phone pressed to her ear, voice low. I didn't need to hear the words. I'd seen enough to recognize desperation when it takes shape. July 15th, 2022, Friday morning. I remember the weight of the envelope. It arrived by certified mail, heavy, official, stamped with the clerk's seal from Albemarle County. I slid it open at the kitchen counter. Inside were copies of her constructive trust claim and unjust enrichment petition. Emily had filed. She was claiming that through joint family residence and investment, she had an equitable interest in the property. She'd recorded a lis pendens, a pending lawsuit notice, on the house's title. It was the legal equivalent of planting a flag in the soil and daring me to dig it out. 2 days later, my bank froze the home equity line of credit I opened years ago for emergency repairs. A polite letter dated July 17th explained it plainly. Due to a recorded lis pendens on the property title, lending privileges are suspended until the title cloud is resolved. I sat at my study desk that night, the letter flat in front of me, the house unusually silent. It wasn't fear that settled over me. It was the sense of siege becoming formal. The low hum of her ambitions had become paperwork. Court filings. Legal clouds. Susan Sett's house was under attack. Tom came by the next afternoon. He stood by the magnolia tree, hands in his coat pockets, looking up at the branches. She made her move, he said. Yeah, I answered. She sips playing for real now. She thinks the lis pendens will pressure you to settle, scare you into giving her a slice before the fight starts. She doesn't know me very well, I said quietly. Tom gave a small smile. Then it's time we show her. We went inside, laid out every document on the dining table, the trust letter, the deed, the mortgage payoff, the recording, Nancy's statement. It was all there, years of vigilance now lined up like soldiers waiting for orders. That night, as rain tapped the porch roof, I sat alone in the den. Emily had moved from whispers to war, and I was done pretending this was just family tension. This was legacy. This was Susan Sepp's promise. And I wasn't about to let it slip through legal loopholes and greed. Outside, the magnolia stood firm in the summer dark, roots deep, branches unwavering. I realized then I'd already built the fortress. She just didn't know how strong it was yet. August 3rd, 2022. The letter from the bank arrived just after lunch, tucked neatly among junk mail and an electric bill. The return address alone made my stomach tighten. Virginia Community Credit Union. I slid it open at the kitchen counter, and before I'd even finished reading the first paragraph, I knew the storm front had officially arrived. Due to a recorded lis pendens on the property title, your home equity line of credit will remain suspended until the title cloud is resolved. We recommend immediate legal consultation. It was polite, bureaucratic, and devastatingly clear. Emily's lawsuit wasn't just a threat anymore. It was already interfering with my finances. That HELOC wasn't about luxury spending. It was my emergency repair cushion, the safety net I'd built after Susan passed. I set the letter down, flattened the creases with my palm, and stared out through the kitchen window at the magnolia tree swaying under a humid Virginia sky. She'd weaponized the legal system. and the first hit had landed. That evening, Mark came by after work. Emily didn't join him, something that was happening more often lately. He stood in the doorway, hands in his jacket pockets, looking 10 years older than his 37 years. Dad, he started carefully. Maybe there's sets another way to handle this. I raised an eyebrow. Another way. He shifted uneasily. Emily thinks maybe if we sit down, mediate, maybe you could offer a settlement, just to make this go away. I let the silence stretch until he looked down at the floor. Mark, I said slowly, this house isn't set a bargaining chip. This house is your mother. This is every promise we built together. I said to not settling, not for a penny, not for the illusion of peace. He exhaled through his nose. Frustrated. I know. This is getting ugly. And she sits not going to stop. I know she sifts not, I said. Neither am I. The next few weeks became a blur of depositions, filings, and strategic countermoves. Emily's lawyer leaned hard on the marital residence argument, claiming that her occupancy during the pandemic had established equitable interest. Tom dismantled that calmly, piece by piece. Attic locks rekeyed May 17, 2020. Tom recited during one deposition, flipping through our folder with practiced ease. New front door keys issued the same day. This wasn't SEP joint residency. This was hospitality with boundaries. He handed over copies of receipts, timelines, photographs of the new locks. Everything was labeled, dated, bulletproof. Emily's attorney didn't like that. September brought a different kind of pressure. HOA inspectors started showing up at odd times, responding to anonymous complaints, overgrown shrubs, allegedly unsafe attic stairs, paint discoloration on the porch rail, all petty, all clearly orchestrated. I caught one inspector at the door one morning, a young guy holding a clipboard, sweating in the late summer heat. Anonymous complaints, he said, almost apologetically. We have to check. I let him in, walked him through every item, and made sure he saw that nothing was out of compliance. As he left, he said quietly, Sir, I probably shouldn't say this, but whoever sets filing these is persistent. ISEP had 3 work orders for this address in 2 weeks. I nodded. I didn't need to guess who was behind it. Emily was trying to create a paper trail, a false narrative of neglect, hoping it would echo later in court. She didn't know I was documenting everything too. Photos, dates, correspondence. Every HOA notice went straight into the House Originals folder. Meanwhile, the neighborhood began to shift. Realtors started leaving business cards in my mailbox, glossy brochures about Charlottesville market opportunities tucked under the doormat. I'd catch unfamiliar cars idling out front, drivers pointing at the house like tourists on a guided tour. It was psychological warfare, and for the first time in months, I felt the house itself tense around me. The silence inside became heavier. Every creak of the cedar floors sounded like a warning. October 20th, 2022. The night Mark finally broke. It was late, cool, the kind of night where sound carries clearly through magnolia branches. I was on the back porch, a mug of black coffee cooling in my hands, when I saw him approach from the sidewalk. He looked exhausted, eyes sunken, shoulders slumped. He stopped beneath the magnolia tree, hands shoved deep into his coat pockets. Dad, he said, voice low, we need to talk. I joined him under the branches. The porch light threw long shadows between us. She rehearsed, he said after a long silence. She rehearsed sympathy lines for court. My stomach tightened. What lines? He stared at the ground. Stuff like as I was like a daughter to him. Seftas. He treated me like family until it wasn't Sefta convenient. Seftas she practiced them. Over and over. I recorded one of them on my phone. I can Sefta do this anymore. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded stack of receipts. Joint purchases, expenses, petty things from their time at the house. She told her lawyer these were proof of shared investment. They setcher not, it setches all her stuff. Clothes, decor, wine, nothing that touches the property. I took the receipts carefully, unfolding them under the porch light. He was right. $89.23 at Pottery Barn. $42.50 for throw pillows. A couple of wine club subscriptions. Nothing close to equitable investment. Mark Sip's voice cracked. Then, I tried, Dad. I thought maybe she sips calm down, but she sips not stopping, and I can sip be part of it anymore. I looked at my son, the boy who used to sit under this tree with Susan building model airplanes on summer evenings, and for the first time in years I saw the man he was becoming, not Emily's shadow, his own person. He moved out the next week. Quietly, without ceremony, Emily stayed in D.C. with her sister for a while after that. The house felt clearer, like storm clouds had shifted, revealing the true battle lines. That night, as I locked up the house, I paused at the magnolia tree. Its branches were bare again, autumn winds rustling through like whispered warnings. The siege hadn't lifted, but something fundamental had changed. For the first time, Emily wasn't the only one moving pieces on the board. I had Mark back, and she didn't see that coming. December has a way of making silence feel heavier. The air sharpens, the nights stretch long, and the house creaks like it's remembering everything you've tried to forget. December 2022 was like that, quiet on the surface, but underneath everything was moving toward collision. By then, Emily's lawsuit was fully active. Court dates had been scheduled for March 2023. Filings were piling up like winter drifts, and the tidal cloud hung over the house like a storm. No one else could see, but the chaos outside had brought an unexpected clarity inside. Mark had moved out in late October, and for the first time in years it was just me in the house again. No staged wine nights, no fake flyers in the trash, no passive-aggressive comments echoing down hallways. Just cedar floors, magnolia branches scratching at the siding, and time to prepare. And preparation was exactly what I did. The first week of December, Tom and I began assembling the exhibits for trial. We met every other night in my dining room, papers spread across the table like battle maps. Exhibit A, deed and title. Clean chain of ownership since 2008, single holder, no marital cosigners. Exhibit B, mortgage payoff letter. Dated December 18th, 2015, $699,842. Final payment, Susan's handwriting on the bottom. We did it. Exhibit C, trust documents, contingent transfer letter to the Veterans Trust, executed and notarized December 2nd, 2021. Exhibit D, audio recording, April 10th, 2021, BBQ, Emily's admission. Exhibit E, witness statement, Nancy Green, notarized April 11th, 2021. Exhibit Fish, HOA and Realtor interference file, dates, complaints, inspector statements, photos. Exhibit G, financial receipts and Mark's records demonstrating lack of marital investment. Every piece had its place. Every document was labeled, tabbed, and backed with certified copies stored in Tom's office and my fire safe. I'd spent my life engineering ships where precision meant survival. This was no different. Paperwork was my armor, preparation was my weapon. One evening, around December 10th, I walked the hallway at night. The house was dim, lit only by the warm pools of light from the sconces. I passed the framed photos of Susan and Mark, the magnolia tree in bloom behind them. My fingers brushed the wall where Susan had once written in pencil. After the final mortgage payment cleared, we did it. The faint scrawl was still there. I sipped and never painted over it. Standing there in that quiet hallway, I asked myself the question I sipped had been avoiding all year. Would Susan want this fight? For a long time, I wasn't sure of the answer. She was gentle, but she was fierce about legacy. She'd fought for every inch of this house when we built it, argued with contractors, picked every fixture, planted that magnolia tree with her own hands. She believed in promises, not shortcuts. I imagined her voice then, low and steady. Don't let her take it. And my hesitation evaporated. Mid-December, Evelyn Cho reached out. She was a clerk at the county courthouse, a fellow veteran I'd met through Tom's legal circles. She'd heard whispers about Emily's lawyer trying to pressure a settlement through procedural delays. We met at a coffee shop downtown, the kind with fogged windows and over-roasted beans that smelled like burnt sugar. She wore her old army jacket, her hair pulled back tight. Judge Coleman Seps presiding, she told me between sips, retired Marine, built his own house out near Crozet. Hates Liz Pendon's abuse. Like personally, he sips seen too many people weaponize it. I felt a slow, steady surge of something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in months, hope. She leaned closer. If your paperwork is clean and from what Tom says, it is, she sips walking into a buzzsaw. Thanks, Evelyn, I said. That helps. She smiled. Just make sure you don't flinch. By December 20th, final discovery deadlines were closing in. Emily Sepp's lawyer kept fishing for settlement talks through back channels, suggesting amicable resolutions and avoiding lengthy litigation. Tom would read their emails out loud, his tone dry as toast. They said panicking, he said one night, tapping a paragraph, that our client is open to creative solutions. Sepp translation, they know they Sepp cornered. I watched the magnolia tree from the window as he spoke, its branches skeletal against a cold, clouded sky. They're not getting creative with my house, I said. He grinned. Good. That sips the Orion I remember. Christmas approached slowly that year. I didn't bother with a big tree. I strung a few lights on the porch and around the magnolia, just like Susan used to. On December 23rd, I found myself sitting on the porch steps after dark, mug of mulled cider warming my hands, watching the lights blink against the branches. For the first time in years, they looked like they belonged to my Christmas again, not a stage for Emily's curated Instagram posts. Mark called that night. His voice was steadier now. Dad, I shall be there for the trial, he said. I don't set care what she says. She crossed a line. I know, I said quietly. And I said I'm glad. He hesitated. I should Seth stood up sooner. You sutter here now, I told him. That sutter's what matters. The last week of December brought a strange calm. The legal chessboard was set. Every piece was in position. The house was quiet, but it wasn't the suffocating silence of siege anymore. It was the silence of resolve. Late one night, I stood by the front door looking out at the magnolia in the winter moonlight. The branches were still, the ground hard with frost. I realized that the fear I'd felt in 2018, the fear that Emily could unravel everything Susan and I built, was gone. In its place was certainty. Sheaston underestimated me. And soon a judge was going to see the truth laid bare. On December 31st, Tom came over for one final prep session. We toasted with bourbon in the dining room, surrounded by carefully stacked binders and exhibit folders. To Susan, Tom said, lifting his glass, and to storms that don't scare you anymore. I clinked my glass against his, to storms. The magnolia branches outside tapped softly against the siding. Winter winds were gathering, and I was ready to meet them head on. March 7th, 2023. Charlottesville Circuit Court. The air was still cold, late winter kind of cold, the kind that makes every breath feel sharper, cleaner. I stood on the courthouse steps just after 8 a.m. A black wool coat pulled tight, exhibit binders under my arm. For 5 years this moment had been approaching like a slow tide, and now it was here. Tom joined me at the entrance, coffee in one hand, legal briefcase in the other. You ready? He asked. I nodded once. More than I've ever been. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed, and the tile floors echoed with the clipped footsteps of clerks, lawyers, and people hoping the system would see them clearly. We checked in, passed through security, and waited outside courtroom 3. Evelyn Cho passed us in the hallway, gave a small nod. Her presence was quiet reassurance. She knew Coleman's tendencies better than anyone. At 8:45, Emily arrived. She stepped out of the elevator wearing a cream blouse, a tailored navy skirt, and a carefully styled ponytail. Her makeup was soft, deliberate, courtroom sympathy chic. Beside her, her attorney carried a slim leather folio, confident smile plastered on his face. They looked like a campaign poster for reasonable plaintiff and seasoned counsel. But I saw the tension in her jaw. She'd underestimated the ground she was walking into. The bailiff called us in at 9 sharp. Judge Robert Coleman presided, retired Marine, broad-shouldered, clean-shaven, the kind of man who didn't need to raise his voice to command attention. Evelyn hadn't exaggerated. He had the presence of someone who'd built his own walls, literally and figuratively. Emily's attorney began with practiced warmth. Your Honor, this is a case about fairness, about promises unspoken but understood, about shared investment and family. He gestured toward Emily like she was a portrait. My client was welcomed into this home, treated as family, and over the years made it her own through contribution and care. She is not asking for what is not hers, she is asking for what equity demands. It was well rehearsed, polished. He painted her as the sympathetic daughter-in-law betrayed by a cold father figure. Emily dabbed at her eyes with a tissue at exactly the right moment. I'd expected this. Tom stood next, calm and deliberate. This case, he said, is about legacy, legal title, and documented truth. My client, Mr. Orion Hale, built and paid off his home with his late wife, Susan. It has never been co-owned, commingled, or promised. What SEP's being claimed here is not equity. It's SEP's opportunism, dressed in sentiment. Coleman Sepp's eyes didn't Sepp flicker. He just nodded once. Proceed. Emily's lawyer started with what I expected, marital residence theory. He argued that Emily and Mark had lived in the house during the pandemic, that she'd contributed to household life, and that this created an equitable claim. He produced photos of her hosting wine nights, printed screenshots from social media showing her maintaining the home, and bank statements showing petty expenses. Tom countered immediately. Those expenses are decorative purchases, personal items, not property investments, he said. Throw pillows and wine subscriptions do not a deed make. Then came the attic lock incident. Emily Sepp's attorney tried to spin the May 2020 rickying as exclusionary behavior inconsistent with family integration. Tom calmly flipped open a folder. Receipt for lock cylinders, May 17, 2020. New keys issued same day to both Mark and Emily. He slid the receipts forward. This was boundary maintenance, not exclusion. The homeowner has that right, and he exercised it transparently. Judge Coleman examined the copies, nodded slightly, noted. Then came their surprise play. An email allegedly from me to Mark dated sometime in early 2019, implying future inheritance. They projected it on the screen dramatically, as if they'd uncovered a hidden confession. The email read, "You still have the house one day, son. Keep Emily happy, and she said'll be taken care of too." Tom didn't flinch. Your Honor, that document was produced late and without proper metadata. He pulled a stapled packet from our binder. Here is the notarized Veterans Trust Letter dated December 2nd, 2021, explicitly placing the house into contingent trust. It precludes any informal inheritance promises. Furthermore, this alleged email doesn't appear in Mr. Hale's sent mail archives. We filed a forensic IT affidavit last month. Coleman leaned forward. Do you have the trust letter copy? Tom handed it up. Coleman skimmed it carefully, then looked directly at Emily Sepp's lawyer. This is dated almost 3 years after your email, and it's Sepp's notarized. Unless you Sepps are arguing fraud, this carries more weight. Emily Sepp's lawyer shifted uncomfortably. We are not alleging fraud, Your Honor. Then move on, Coleman said curtly. Tom's turn came next. He walked through our exhibits A.G. like a man dismantling a puzzle piece by piece. The deed, the mortgage payoff letter, the trust, the HOA complaints, the financial receipts showing lack of investment. It was all there, labeled, sequential, clean, and then he pressed play. The BBQ recording, April 10th, 2021. Emily Sepp's voice filled the courtroom. A little fuzzy but unmistakable. Judges love young moms. Worst case, I sue. He once sent know what hit him. The room went silent. Coleman's expression didn't change, but you could feel the temperature drop. Emily's shoulders stiffened. Her lawyer tried to object, claiming context was missing, but Tom overrode him with Nancy Green's notarized statement. She'd heard the whole conversation, signed it the next day. Coleman held up a hand. Enough. I've heard enough. His ruling came swiftly, decisively. The lis pendens is hereby dissolved. The plaintiff's claims of constructive trust and unjust enrichment are dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, given the baseless nature of these claims and the hardship caused by the tidal cloud, The court awards the defendant recovery of legal fees in the amount of $32,000. Emily's lawyer started to protest. Coleman didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Equity, he said, is not entitlement. Court adjourned. The gavel cracked like a rifle shot. The sound echoed in my chest long after the courtroom emptied. Emily sat frozen, her lawyer whispering urgently, but the fight had drained out of her shoulders. For years she'd spoken like the outcome was inevitable, that the house would eventually be hers because she wanted it badly enough. That morning the law reminded her that wanting doesn't override ownership. Tom clapped me on the shoulder as we walked out into the cold. That, he said, was beautiful. I looked up at the pale sky, air crisp in my lungs. For the first time in 5 years, the house wasn't under siege anymore. The storm had broken, and I'd stood my ground. Summer came early to Charlottesville that year. By June 2023, the magnolia tree was in full bloom again, thick white flowers opening against blue skies, filling the air with that heavy, sweet perfume Susan loved. The house was quiet now, not tense quiet, not watchful, just peaceful. The lawsuit was over. The lice pendants dissolved. The HELOC was on its way to being restored, and Emily's world was beginning to collapse under the weight of her own ambitions. The first cracks showed just 3 weeks after the ruling. Realtors stopped returning her calls. Her boutique contacts, what few remained, began distancing themselves. She'd leaned hard on her image as a sharp, upwardly mobile Charlottesville tastemaker, the kind who could turn family connections into social capital. But when you sue your own father-in-law and get laughed out of court by a Marine judge, word travels fast. Nancy told me she overheard 2 women at the farmer's market, whispering near the honey stand. "She's the one who tried to take that house," one of them said. The other shook her head. "Some people don't know when to quit. Charlottesville isn't a big city. Reputations don't dissolve quietly here. They unravel publicly, thread by thread." By July, the financial judgment hit. The court had awarded me $32,000 in legal fees, and Emily was responsible for it. She didn't have the money. Her boutique had folded. Her credit lines were maxed, and her attempts to quietly sell luxury items, handbags, jewelry, some investment decor pieces barely made a dent. On July 3rd, her attorney filed a request for an installment payment plan. Tom forwarded it to me with a single line: "She sips cornered." The judge approved the plan but attached liens to any future property she might acquire. It was surgical. She wasn't going to escape this debt through creative accounting or quick flipping. July 18th, 2023. Mark filed for divorce. He came by that evening, standing on the porch under the magnolia tree as dusk settled in. The cicadas were buzzing, the air warm and thick. He looked tired, but his eyes were clearer than they'd been in years. "I finally did it," he said simply. I nodded. "I know. She saw the house, Dad, not the family." I kept trying to believe she seffed change, but he shook his head slowly. "She never loved any of this. She just wanted to own it." I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. He looked up at the magnolia tree, the branches swaying gently in the summer air. "She used to talk about putting in a pool here, right there." He pointed to the backyard, like she sept already decided. "That sep's because she had," I said quietly. Mark exhaled. "I should seen it sooner." "You did," I told him. "Eventually. That matters." We sat on the porch steps for a long time without talking, listening to the night sounds. For years that tree had heard whispered schemes and quiet resolve. Now it heard release. Emily tried to salvage her image for a while. She posted a few carefully curated life update reels online, clips of her walking downtown with sunglasses, vague captions about new beginnings. But the engagement numbers told the story. Her audience wasn't buying it anymore. By late August, she'd moved out of D.C. entirely. Word was she went to stay with her cousin near Richmond. Realtors whispered that she'd tried pitching herself as a stager and luxury consultant. But no one was biting. Too much baggage. Too much public failure. The woman who once strutted through my house like it was already hers now couldn't even rent a decent place without explaining liens on her credit report. For me, that summer wasn't about gloating. It was about breathing again, about repairing what had been quietly damaged. I called the bank on August 29th to confirm the HELOC reinstatement. The woman on the phone said cheerfully, "Yes, Mr. Hale. Your line of credit has been fully restored as of March 16th. You should set received the letter already." I looked over at the corkboard by my desk. Sure enough, it was pinned there, tucked behind utility receipts and an old postcard from Susan, March 16th. 2 weeks after the trial, I'd been too focused on the courtroom to celebrate then. That afternoon, I sat on the porch with a glass of iced tea and watched the sunset light catch the magnolia blossoms. The house was mine again, not just on paper, but in spirit. The weight that had hung over it since that night in 2018 when I heard Emily under the tree was finally gone. Nancy came by one evening in September with a fresh pie. She leaned on the porch rail, eyes on the tree. "You did it," she said. "No," I replied, smiling faintly. "We did. You, Tom, Mark, even Evelyn." She laughed. "Yeah, but you such are the one who kept the receipts." We sat there eating pie, watching fireflies blink in the humid dusk. I realized then that revenge, when done right, doesn't feel like fireworks. It feels like silence after a storm. Clean, earned. December 5th, 2023. The lights went up early that year. I stood on the ladder beneath the porch eaves. A string of Susan's old Christmas lights looped over my arm, the air crisp enough to see my breath. The magnolia tree was bare again, its dark branches reaching into the gray winter sky like ink on paper. For the first time in years, hanging these lights didn't feel like I was decorating a battlefield. It felt like coming home. The house smelled faintly of cedar and cinnamon from the potpourri I'd set out that morning. The radio inside played quiet carols. A breeze carried the scent of wood smoke from somewhere down the block. Everything was ordinary, simple. And after the 5-year siege I'd weathered, ordinary felt extraordinary. On the corkboard by my desk, pinned neatly beside utility bills and a yellowing postcard from 2009, was the March 16th bank letter. "Your home equity line of credit has been fully restored. Thank you for your patience during the title clearance process." I'd left it there intentionally, not out of negligence but as a reminder, a quiet marker of the day my house was fully, legally, and spiritually mine again. It was funny, during the fight that letter had been just another piece of paperwork. Now it felt like a badge, proof that what Susan and I built couldn't be stolen by schemes, lawsuits, or whispered boasts under a magnolia tree. As evening fell, I plugged in the lights. They flickered on slowly, then glowed warm and steady against the cedar brick walls. The magnolia tree, though leafless, caught the glow like a silent sentinel. For years that tree had overheard betrayal, plans, and late-night resolve. Tonight it witnessed peace. Nancy walked over from next door, wrapped in her green coat, hands tucked into mittens. She tilted her head back to look at the lights. "You haven't put these up this early since, what, 2016? I climbed down from the ladder, smiling. "Yeah, felt like it was time." "They look good," she said. "The house looks happy again." "It is," I replied simply. She gave a small, approving nod. "Susan would sift like this." That landed in my chest softly like snow on branches. "Yeah," I said. "She would sef." Later that night, I sat by the front window with a mug of hot cider, watching the lights reflect in the glass. The house creaked gently as it settled against the cold. I thought back to March 2018, the grill smoke. Emily's careless words, the way my stomach dropped when I heard her call this place hers. 5 years. It had taken 5 years of patience, planning, and relentless documentation to keep Susan's dream intact. There were moments I'd doubted myself. Nights I'd stood in this very hallway, wondering if the fight was worth it. But then I'd remember Susan's handwriting on that payoff letter. "We did it. She built this house with me. She filled it with life. Losing it would have been like losing her again. And that was never an option." Mark came by on December 22nd to help set up the tree inside. This time it was a modest one. No grand family gathering, no curated Instagram moments. Just father and son untangling old lights and unpacking ornaments that still smelled faintly of pine from Christmases past. He held up one of Susan's crocheted snowflake ornaments. "She made this the year I left for college," he said softly. "I remember," I replied. She stayed up half the night finishing the set. He hung it carefully on the tree, then looked around the house. It feels different now, he said. Better. It is different, I answered, because it's South again. Mark nodded, eyes tracing the magnolia through the frosted window. She really loved that tree. She did, I said. She said as long as it stood, the house would have roots. Christmas Eve was quiet, just the way I wanted it. Nancy brought over a plate of cookies. Mark stayed for dinner, and afterward we sat on the porch watching the lights glow against the dark Virginia sky. No lawsuits, no realtors, no whispered schemes in the night. I realized then that revenge, at its best, isn't about destroying someone else. It's about refusing to let them destroy you. Emily tried to claim this house through manipulation and legal trickery. What she never understood was that this place wasn't just property. It was promise. It was Susan's legacy. And some promises don't die with the person who made them. They get stronger when tested. As the clock struck midnight, I looked at the magnolia tree, the lights glowing softly behind it, and felt something I hadn't in years, complete closure. You didn't lose me, I murmured into the winter air, imagining Emily Sepp's face when Coleman delivered his verdict. You gave me away. The magnolia stood still, roots deep, branches strong. The house stood with it, and so did I.